Hi, my name is Maddie Tromf and today I'll be doing my presentation for Task 1 of the Contemporary Child and Play-Based Learning. In my initial research I found a quote that was supported in Bartlett and Kennedy, Degattardi and Ebic and Wanaganaki, and that is, play-based learning plays an integral role in the contemporary child's social, emotional and cognitive development. It was through this quote and also Urie Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory that I based all of my observations and my subsequent presentation. Urie Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory was fascinating in the way that it divided a child's life into 4 systems. Just recently there has been a 5th one added, but this picture shows the mesosystem, the microsystem and the exosystem. Throughout my presentation it will become evident how different contemporary issues can impact these systems and subsequently impact the way in which young children interact and play. So I'll just introduce you to my focus child for this presentation. Her name is Maya. She is 4 years old and she is the older sister to a brother and a newborn sister. Maya's family has just recently made the move from the sunny beaches of Noosa to the red dirt mining town of Kambalda, Western Australia. Initially when I began this task, I didn't give much thought to how much of an impact the environmental change would have on Maya, but as you can tell throughout my presentation, it's quite evident that the contemporary issue of relocation has really affected the way in which Maya interacts in the classroom and in her early childcare environment. Throughout my observations of Maya, it became evident that she loved to draw. Initially when I was observing her, I feel like I was observing her drawing quite superficially, but when I began to explore Bronfenbrenner's theory a little bit more in depth, I realised that the way in which she was drawing, the language she was using and the actual drawings that she was making were quite heavily impacted by the environmental change that she had experienced. So this here is my first observation of a drawing. You've got here what looks like a person on a red line with some blue lines in the background. As an adult, obviously we struggle to take a step back and really try and see it in the way that a child would, but that's something that I tried really hard to do during these observations. So when I questioned Maya, it was in a very sensitive way of not wanting to lead her down any particular path, but just wanting her to be as innocent in her explanations as possible. So if we have a look to this side of the screen, I asked Maya what's happening in this picture, and she said, this is Alfie being her younger brother. And I said, what is he doing? And she said, he's on a boat floating and sailing on the water. I said, oh, that's a great picture, Maya. What else can you tell me about it? Trying to prompt her to really use the private language that she was using in her head as she was drawing the picture. She informed me that Alfie was on the river and that her and her mum were watching him, but you can't see us. When I asked her which river, when I asked Maya which river that she was on, she said Noosa River. I didn't react in any way to this, but I observed Maya. She went quiet and she sort of sat there and she thought about it for a little bit, and then she looked at me and she said, no, we're not on Noosa River, we're in Kalgoorlie. When I went home and had a look back on these observations, I realised how much of an impact the environmental changes had on Maya, in the way that she almost seemed fearful of saying she was in Noosa when the actual reality is she's moved to Western Australia. When I went home and reflected on this observation, I looked through the textbook, the course text, and I also looked at some of the course readings, and I gained an understanding that often play that children engage with can show either underlying fears or contexts that they've experienced at home. And when I spoke to Maya's mum and I asked her about it, she informed me that Maya had often on the phone stated to her grandparents and close family that she was still in Noosa. So she'd been, I guess, in her eyes, reprimanded by her parents and reminded that she actually, in fact, no longer lived in Noosa and she lived in Kalgoorlie. So when people asked her, she had to make sure that, you know, she corrected this. It was interesting because when we move back into Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory and you think of some of these contemporary issues facing children today, it is evident how much environmental changes can impact the way in which a child will interact and communicate. I noticed in her playing that she was quite solitary as well. Something I had never seen in her before when we lived in Noosa. And it was interesting because it seemed that not only the environmental change of location, but also the continuity of her care seems to have impacted the way in which she interacts with other children. That's something obviously I'll touch on a little bit later, the continuity being a contemporary issue that was impeding Maya's ability to interact with her play as she has in the past. But if we move on to her second drawing, you can't see it very well here, but Maya informed me it's a green box with it's filled in with yellow crayon. And when I asked Maya